I just take a moment and a tiny portion of the screen to welcome Catherine Malabou back again. I'm very, very happy to do that. This is, I think, the third evening lecture that we've had, and the weather has been good to us this time as we make our way up the hill. I will not try to introduce Catherine. I think that she's certainly very well enough known, and I don't want to take up time with things that everyone knows, but I do want to reiterate how happy I am that she was able to do this. Her title is, I hope I remember this now, Morphing Intelligence for AI and Anarchy.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris.
And she says to me that she is searching with some thoughts here. I will anticipate what you will say there. Catherine, thank you very much, and I leave the screen to you.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, so good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. It's the end of a wonderful week, and I want to thank my students very, very warmly. It's been, I can't find the words. So thank you for this gift. Yes, what I intend to present is a kind of, let's say, dialogue or between two of my recent books, my recent research topics. One is already published. It's Morphing Intelligence from IQ to AI. So hence the title, Morphing Intelligence 4. And the other on Anarchism, called Stop Thief, Anarchism and Philosophy, which will be released next fall. So, as you understand, the dialogue will obviously be between intelligence and more precisely artificial intelligence and anarchism. So as I said to Chris, this is a work in progress, so I'm trying to see what each book can bring to the other, and so I apologize in advance for the tentative character of my conclusions. We'll see that Jean Baudrillard will also be part of this conversation. Okay. So when I wrote this book, the first one, from Morphing Intelligence, from IQ to IA, it was around 2016, and intelligence, the concept of intelligence, had accomplished only 3 of what I called its metamorphoses, that is, the transformations that had occurred in its concept in just over a century. From the time of its birth as the prime object of experimental psychology in the 19th century, up to its most recent neurobiological and cybernetic developments. Because we have to keep in mind that intelligence started to make sense as a concept in psychology. So this was the first metamorphosis. So I gave a name to each of these 3 metamorphoses of intelligence: genetic fate, epigenesis and synaptic simulation, and the third one was the power of automatism. So let me recall these moments very briefly so that we can open what will appear to be, in my mind, in my opinion, the fourth one. So the first one started with the characterization of intelligence, so as I said in the 19th century, as a measurable entity that could be assessed with tests and was associated with the J factor. It was the first name of the IQ, and then with the IQ. It began with Francis Galton's work and the creation of eugenics in the 19th century. And then it went on with the French psychologists Alfred Binet and Théodore Simon, who invented the first intelligence scales, and then with the invention of the IQ proper. And then the search later on for a possible intelligence gene. So the first moment of intelligence goes from the invention of the test up to the genetic of intelligence. And we can go back to that in the discussion, but for me it's one and the same. This measurable intelligence necessarily implies that intelligence is something innate. The second metamorphosis, in my opinion, occurred with the shift in the 20th century, the shift from the genetic to the epigenetic paradigm in the early 21st century biology, end of 20th and beginning of the 21st century. This change allowed for a reconsideration of the idea of a blind genetic determinism and opened the possibility of a new examination of the action of the environment on the constitution of the mind and consequently also on intelligence. Now we know that the development of intelligence is largely epigenetic, meaning that habit, experience, education play a determining role in the formation of the brain and in the life of neuronal connections. But this second metamorphosis also affected artificial intelligence, thereby supporting the hypothesis that natural intelligence and synaptic machines had the same structure. While the metaphor of the computer brain had been obsolete for some time now, the idea of a machine that can become a brain, a machine that is just as evolving and adaptive as a neuronal architecture, to the point of being able to simulate it perfectly and increase operating speed virtually to infinity, began to make complete sense. The manufacture of chips with plasticity, chips able to transform themselves, was the equivalent achievement in the field of AI to the neurobiological revolution of the 1980s. The third metamorphosis, still more recent, coincided with the birth of what was called strong AI and the development of neural networks, deep learning, and big data. But as all of you know, recently AI has accomplished an enormous leap, and already, the age of neural networks, deep learning, etc. seems already obsolete. And I'm of course thinking of the development of the chatbot, and in particular ChatGPT, of course. So that's why I believe that intelligence has entered the age of its fourth metamorphosis, and this is an age that I will tentatively once again call anarchic replication. Anarchic replication. Anarchic having to be taken here literally as something that doesn't have any arche, which means in Greek principle. Principle meaning here a commandment. The fourth metamorphosis is not only an age where artificial intelligence simulation is limitless, but it is also an age where the disappearance of the model-copy dualism allows for the emergence of a no less limitless horizontality. Such a horizontality is at once technological, of course, but also ontological, and this is the most important trait, political. Because I think that this fourth metamorphosis is the age of anarchy. At stake for me is whether we can envisage a possible transition from anarchic replication to anarchist replication. What if the new metamorphosis of intelligence were not only the age of cyber capitalism or libertarianism, but also that of a new type of anarchism and of what I call non-governability. So I will now move, if you don't mind, to the second book, in which I try to reflect on anarchism. So again, the second book is Stop Thief, Philosophy and Anarchism. In this book, my main problem was to analyze the concept of horizontality and in particular what I call the crisis, the contemporary crisis of horizontality, the political crisis of horizontality. So what is it about? So let me explain, and then of course I will come back to intelligence. The current crisis in horizontality derives from the global coexistence of what we can call, on the one hand, a de facto anarchy, a factual anarchy, and on the other, a dawning anarchism. This coexistence makes it difficult to achieve a rigorous distinction between resignation and initiative, forced as they are to walk now on the same ground. So what do I call de facto anarchy? It is clear, in my view, that the state has already disintegrated, offering nothing more than a protective envelope for the various oligarchies that have divided up the world between themselves. Everywhere, the social world is condemned to a horizontality of abandonment. In economically privileged democratic countries, and now I write democratic in quotation marks, the effects of the already long-standing collapse of the welfare state continue to circulate indefinitely. No state institution, no common parliamentary organization can respond to the challenges of poverty, migrations, health, ecological crisis in any way other than through pitiful emergency measures. But at the same time, there is the dawning anarchism. It was difficult to translate. Anarchisme d'éveil in French, which is waking up, and my translator chose dawning. So the dawning anarchism is the actual collapse in the social meaning the actual collapse in the social meaning of verticality coincides with an emergent planetary consciousness signaled by the dramatic rise in collective initiatives and experiments in alternative political visions. In France, for example, in recent years, we had, like everywhere else, Occupy strategies, but in France, the Gilets jaunes movement, the Yellow Vests, more recently, the protests against Macron, all demonstrations that have introduced to the political landscape the effective existence of organizations and modes of decision based on self-generated collective modes of organization. There's clearly a connection between the anti-globalization view of anarchism, which dates back to events in Seattle in 1999, and the explosion of these phenomena that, even though they do not openly or always align themselves with anarchism, are taking place clearly outside of unions and traditional political parties. These alternative phenomena coincide exactly with what must be termed the anarchic turn in capitalism itself, which is the prime actor of the de facto anarchy. This turn, the anarchic turn of capitalism, is born from the financial crisis of the 2000s, marked the shift from neoliberalism to ultra-liberalism. The development of post-Fordist capitalism at the end of the 20th century was not yet fluent in the language that economic actors practice openly today, which is the new hegemonic language of anarcho-capitalism. The objection is loud and clear. Are we not witness to a global hardening of political interventionism that is inseparable from a new form of centralizing economic power? How can you talk about this anarchic turn of capitalism when we are clearly facing an intensified political authoritarianism, the confiscating of wealth and profit by a handful of companies and conglomerates? Yes, we certainly are. And yet, when political commentators declare in all seriousness that Donald Trump is an anarchist, was the title of an article in the New Yorker, they are not using the words lightly. They are trying to articulate what the entire world is experiencing as a major crisis, which is the hybrid combination of government violence and an unending Uberization of life. Authoritarianism does not oppose the disappearance of the state. It is rather its messenger. It masks this so-called collaborative economy that it masks. It's different masks. Are this so-called collaborative economy that every day erodes still further any fixed regulations by putting professionals and users in direct contact through technological platforms. How then can we separate? The question is, can we separate the horizontality of dawning anarchism, these political organizations or formations I was talking about? How can we separate them from the waistlines of anarcho-capitalism? That's why I think that we're currently living in a time of deep anarchist ambiguity. And the development of AI is, of course, actively participating in this undecidability. Let me take 3 examples. First, the world of the blockchain, cryptocurrency transactions, and the circulation of non-national currencies, on which I made some research a few years ago because, at the time, I was fascinated by the promise they represented. Cryptocurrencies, as we know, leech off state currencies and compete in the usual circulation of funds by commercial and central banks. At the time, I thought, wasn't this announcing the end of a certain epoch of governmentality, centralization, and hierarchy? But it did not take long for me to understand that in reality, these new systems were strengthening control, inequalities, and oligarchic trends. Second example of this ambiguity, Taiwan, where there are now official anarchists holding governmental positions. Such is the case of Audrey Tang, Minister of Digital Affairs in Taiwan, the first transgender prime minister in history, a genius cybernetician and free software creator. Audrey Tang defines himself openly as a, I quote, conservative anarchist. They have identified as post-gender and accept, I quote again, whatever pronoun people want to describe me with online. I'm really whatever, so do whatever. And the pleonasm conservative anarchist should not be misconstrued, because what Tang means is that they want to work on the conservation of the anarchist utopia experimented by net programmers who, over the past 20 years, have been suggesting that a virtual participative democracy be substituted for classical political decision-making. So I'm just describing a little bit more what they do in the government. It all began in spring of 2014 with the emergence in Taiwan of the Sunflower Movement. It was an anarchist movement, and Tang was a participant. Young activists, mostly students, occupied the Taiwanese parliament to protest a new trade pact with China. And they founded Gov, pronounced Gov0, G-O-V, which defined themselves as a collective of civic hackers. Then, it's a long story, but she became minister in first Minister of Digital Affairs, and then Prime Minister more recently. So their strategy consists in using open source coding tools to, I quote, radically redesign and rebuild an existing government process and service, and from this, create new tools to show citizens how the state operates. In other words, to reveal government information to the wider public. So in Taiwan, everyone is allowed to enter the governmental platform and give their opinion, transform, propose transformations of laws, etc., etc. But we see the ambiguity. It's like with the blockchain. The ambiguity is tongue a symptom of emancipation, really, or domination? Because at the same time, everybody says, okay, they invent a new method of governing, but at the same time, I mean, as we know, Taiwan is one of the highest, one of the most capitalistic places on the planet. So, is it a defeat of the logic of government or a reinforcement of it? And my last example of ambiguity, it will be much shorter, is the famous character, Elon Musk, who recently declared on Twitter, "If you must know, I'm a utopian anarchist." And he has repeated that very, very often. Like, everybody's free, Twitter should be free, free opinion, etc. This is the reign of what he calls freedom. And once again, we see how it goes through the horizontality of platforms. So let's try to go further in the analysis of those ambiguities, focusing, as I announced, on the ChatGPT phenomenon. And this is why, because I'm like everyone else, I'm trying to understand what is going on with this phenomenon. And that's why I decided to go back to Baudrillard and his general reflection on simulacra. And I do think that Baudrillard is very unjustly unread today, and what he has to say is extremely interesting about everything that happens today. So let me situate a little bit what he says about simulacra. His main book is Symbolic Exchange and Death. And he says in this book that there are 3 orders of simulacra. And just as there are 3 orders of simulacra, there are 3 metamorphoses of intelligence, and we will try with Baudrillard to see that the 4th metamorphosis and the 4th order of simulacra are coinciding. So for him, the first order of simulacra that he associates with the pre-modern period is an epoch where the image is a clear copy, a copy of the real. The image is recognized as just an illusion, a place marker for the real. He says it's the age of counterfeit, okay, traditional imitation and so on. The second order of simulacra, which he associates with the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century, is an age where the distinctions between the image and its representations begin to break down because of mass production and the proliferation of copies. Such production misrepresents and masks an underlying reality by imitating it so well, thus threatening to replace it. It's the age of equivalences. Photography, cinema, etc. In the third order of simulacra, which is associated in his view with the postmodern age, we are confronted, he says, with what he calls precession of simulacra, that is, an age in which the representation precedes the real, precedes and determines the real. There is no longer any distinction between reality and its representation, there is only the simulacrum. And for him, it's the age of robotics. And he stops there because, of course, he was not able to anticipate the 4th Metamorphoses of Intelligence with AI, but I think that his reading helps us quite a lot to understand that what we are going through with the development of IA is a new age of the simulacra. But let me pursue a little bit with Baudrillard. He says each epoch of the simulacrum coincides with a certain view of language. For example, he says the first one, when image and copy are totally dissociated, is what he calls the reign of the signified. The copy is a signifier that imitates the signified that itself relates to a reference. The second one coincides with the disappearance of the signified opening to a general economy of interchangeable signifiers. It's the age of deconstruction, if you want. General equivalences with no central power of reference. Then the age of robotics, Baudrillard argues, is the loss of symbolic relation. And it stops there. It says that the relation between signifieds and signifiers has exploded. And this is the moment when robotics comes into on the scene. He explains that robots cannot be seen as either signifiers or signified, and that something new is taking place. So I was interested in really trying to pursue and ask myself whether in the age of anarchic replication, a new semantic system was not emerging, like following what Baudrillard is saying. And I will propose that. I think that what substitutes the signifier for the signifier signified logic is the question-answer system, and this on a horizontal plane. It's not that much how does a signifier refers to a signified, but how does something like a question finds an immediate answer horizontally, immediately, with no delay. Ask me about what you intend to mean, and I will answer. ChatGPT tells us, I will provide you with the meaning of what you mean. The asking structure is then more important than what is asked. What is fascinating in this system is the question-answer logic, much more than what we get as answers. The machine tells us we don't care that much about signifieds and signifiers. We just care about what you have to ask, and I will respond. And our relationship is then perfectly horizontal to the extent that my answers are the pure reflections of your queries, because the memory of ChatGPT is just the accumulation of all the responses that human beings have been given to their own questions. So the question-answer system as a possible new semantic structure can be seen as a form of anarchic mode of organization. Anarchic meaning, once again, without an arche, without control, without a governor, without a government. So the question initially was, how can we move, and can we move from anarchy to anarchism? So would this new system, question-answer, would it be able to open an anarchist type of politics? Chomsky, who, as you know, is an anarchist, clearly says no. He wrote a text recently, I think it was published, yes, in the New Yorker last March. It was called The False Promise of ChatGPT. And we understand why he says no. It's because Chomsky is still in the signified logic. He's still in the idea that a language relies on the grammar, and that a language has to follow certain rules that all pertain to linguistics. Even if he totally redefined linguistics, as we know, nevertheless, he belongs to the old system in which we thought that language was needed a gradual learning, relying on principles and articulations, once again, between signifiers and signifieds. So, of course, he says, no, it's a false promise. And the argument is, ChatGPT will push us to renounce our responsibility. Because every time the machine writes in our place, you can always say, it's not me, it's my ChatGPT. It says, the machine is in control, it imposes the responses. And clearly, for Chomsky, what is at stake is responsibility. But by saying that, he points to the real problem, which is response. Response, that is the question. And it is clear that in this new system, I mean, the old logic, once again, of the sign cannot function. Before coming back to this decisive issue of responsibility, let me mention an interesting ChatGPT exchange published on the Anarchist Studies blog. I will quote a few prompts and a few answers. So the prompts were: write an eye-catching introduction for an article about AI dialogue to be published on Anarchist Studies blog. Write a blog entry reflecting on the application of AI dialogue to anarchist political organizing. Prompt: what would Peter Kropotkin say about AI dialogue? Write a short speech in the style of Emma Goldman about AI dialogue. Or write a series of aphorisms in the style of Max Stirner about AI dialogue. And it is true that all the responses are the same. So in a sense, Chomsky is right. I will just read one. I think the funniest one is the Emma Goldman. Just read one. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with a heavy heart that I stand before you today to address the issue of AI dialogue and its impact on our struggle for a free and equitable society. Of course, it's a mimic of a genuine discourse that she gave. We must ask ourselves, are these systems truly serving the interests of the people, or are they simply instruments of control and domination used by corporations and governments to further their own interests? Are these systems promoting equality and freedom, or are they reinforcing harmful biases and perpetuating discrimination? But in fact, all answers are not answers, but new questions. So in fact, we don't get any answer to this question, to these questions. We have to decide whether it's emancipatory or not, etc. So it's true that the responses are shallow, disappointing, and I'm sure we all had this experience of getting really, so sometimes it's true perhaps, dazzled by the incredible phenomenon, and on the other hand, disappointed. And we can interpret such a weakness as a proof of inefficiency, of irresponsibility, as if artificial intelligence was deprived of intelligence. And we hear so many people going in the Chomsky direction. However, if we try to push the interpretation a bit further, we understand that there's something ChatGPT cannot respond, which is it cannot respond of itself. It can, of course, say what it is made for, but it cannot be responsible of itself. So the absence of response here, the disappointment that we feel every time, is in fact linked with a certain absence of response, which is not the absence of a determinate particular response, like what is anarchism, for example. Beyond the absence of a particular response, what manifests itself is something like an irreducible responselessness, answerlessness, as if what ChatGPT was revealing to us was that the place of response was empty, that the place of response could not respond. In this absolute non-response, the chatbot appears, in my view, in its utmost anarchist being, like no one will respond to what you can't respond. The non-response of ChatGPT that hides or lies under all its responses opens a place for non-commandment, the place perhaps of the non-governable. There is and will always be a dimension of responselessness behind all the responses of the speaking machine. We cannot hold it accountable for this responselessness because this space of non-response is not a weakness of the machine. It is what leaves us alone in front of it, and therefore, contrarily to what Chomsky affirms, makes us infinitely responsible. The space of non-response, once again, is not the mark of a defect or an insufficiency of the machine. It is the place of, I have nothing to say. Such a place is not the place of the signified. It's not the place of the signifier. It's not the place of the model as opposed to the copy. It is not the place of the symbolic. It is not the place of the floating signifier, because it is not even empty. In the time of anarchic replication, we are witnessing constant attempts at filling this place up with new modes of control, and the promise that one day ChatGPT or more sophisticated systems will respond to everything. Clearly, capitalism is promising us that in the place of responselessness, there will be the master coming someday, and that, yes, ChatGPT will be able to answer any questions, but it's not true, because there is no machine that can respond to everything, because something like absolute responselessness is ontologically, politically irredeemable. It is the very condition for the existence of intelligence. Intelligence is necessarily associated with responselessness, because otherwise it wouldn't be intelligent. So anarchic replication cannot occult its best enemy, which is the anarchist replication that affirms that, yes, the place of responselessness will remain forever open. So I'm thinking of the constant promises of Elon Musk that one day we'll be able to do this and that, and so the place of emptiness will be filled up with this and that accomplishment. I don't think this will ever be true. Artificial responseless intelligence lets natural intelligence the task of inventing the responsibility for the non-response. This is what anarchism is precisely. Order minus power. The task of inventing ways of life and modes of political organizations out of the absolute responselessness, which is the absence of any possible government. Anarchism is the response to such an absolute responselessness. So I will now conclude. How do we orient ourselves, I was asking, in this new geography whose pathways blur the clear distinction between de facto anarchy and dawning anarchism? How do we orient ourselves in the ontological indifference of differences, when it has become so difficult to distinguish between horizontality and deregulation, liberation and uberization, ecology and economy? So my answer will be very short, and it's my proposal. I think that the age of the fourth metamorphosis of intelligence is perhaps the age when we know that there is absolutely nothing more to await from on high, absolutely nothing more, not even a response. Thank you.